Welcome to Shibuya. Hello everyone, my name is Young Falcon, and I want to preface this by saying The World Ends With You is one of my all-time favorite JRPGs out there, at least the DS version. It's got a gorgeous urban setting, with Shibuya and everything. Exploring it is an absolute blast. The slick, unique art style for characters and even the clothing brands give the game a real big sense of personality. Heck, even the cutscenes ooze a ton of charm. It's got a really fun dual-screen combat system with tons of combos and abilities and experimental builds you can run through with the different pin setups and stuff. It's just a really great game, hype combat moments, and some wonderful story beats. And of course, you gotta talk about that OST. It's not just one generic kind of genre throughout. No, it really sounds like a bunch of teenagers trying to find their sound, and they really try to establish their sense of personality. Like, they got all sorts of different sounds when it comes to rock, metal, hip-hop, even pop. There's all sorts of great genres kind of mixed into the OST. It's got a ton of great things going for it in terms of musical production is what I'm trying to get at. And the combat sounds and the overall game feel and just the comfy atmosphere 20 provides, yeah, it's really great, IMO. It's easily one of the best DS titles ever made. That being said, it's really hard to recommend picking up The World Ends With You unless you happen to own a DS or 3DS and don't mind playing it that way, as the dual screen combat is truly a one-of-a-kind gimmick that, as you'll see when we talk about the Switch port, is pretty hard to get right. When you play it on the Nintendo Switch, we have these Joy-Con controls that you point around with that just feels very clunky and you lose calibration all the time. And your other alternative is the touchscreen controls, which somehow just doesn't register or feel right. You'll swipe around the screen and sometimes it registers the swipe, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it tries to recognize it as a movement option, so your character will slide instead of swiping. Sometimes when you tap an enemy, there's this weird delay and it takes a little bit for them to lock on, and there's this all sorts of clunky things going on in the combat. It feels like a big old clunk fest, and that makes the entire flow of the game just not really work out. Now, the port isn't what I would say bad. The gameplay is a little bit butchered because, again, transitioning from a dual screen DS combat and the sleekness of that to a console/handheld screen is going to be difficult inherently, so I can't really knock them too hard. But the things that they did on the side were really great. The HD sprites looked incredible. The final episode was a great segue into The World Ends With You, and everything else that they've done was really standout stuff. It's just the downside was the gameplay had to suffer because it's a brand new console that they're trying to work with in a game that was made for the DS. Overall, it's not the worst experience, and it's hard to recommend with its $50 price tag, but if you do want to play 20, as of right now, the best way is, again, if you do not have a DS, picking up the Switch version on sale or something of that nature. There is a mobile port that I will briefly mention, mainly because it's kind of delisted off of everything as of what I've heard recently. I think it's something about 64-bit Android devices not being compatible with The World Ends With You's mobile port anymore, which is a little bit sad because it was one of the better ones if you had a decent Android phone that could run it. I believe it is also on iPhone, but I don't own any Apple devices, so don't quote me there. Hopefully I gave you guys some options to go out there and please play the original game. It is a really great time, and I highly recommend you guys check it out if you're a fan of JRPGs, especially ones that have more contemporary feels, like say your Personas or Earthbounds or things like that, something in a modern setting. It's a really good time, and I think you guys would very much enjoy it. As for which version do I recommend, I think it's quite obvious. Please play the DS version if you can. That is by far the most superior way to play the game, and it feels and controls the best in my opinion. Alright, so now that I've shilled The World Ends With You enough, if you do not have the time or resources or whatnot to play the game, I'm going to link down below some videos of full walkthroughs and also some story recaps to help you catch you up to speed for The World Ends With You if you don't want to go into the sequel completely blind. And don't worry about this video and spoilers. I will let you know when they come up, which will be at the very end of the video, and I'll have timestamps galore in case anyone's worried about running into any of those. For now, let's dive into Neo: The World Ends With You and remind people what makes this JRPG so special compared to the rest. Our game starts with an apocalyptic level vision of Shibuya being torn apart by a cataclysm or a black hole of sorts. After the game shows this vision, it introduces us to our two protagonists, Rindo Kanade and Fret Furusawa, two extremely good friends and classmates who stumble across unique pins that are being passed out like candy all around the city. These pins sport a black drop and a red face skull, and if you guys played the first game, you know exactly what this means. It's none other than the Reaper's Game pin. As they walk around Shibuya with their newly acquired pins, things start to get a little crazy. Noise flies around, hunting people in the real world, blowing up cars, and eventually attacking R2 players. Rindo, however, before a devastating attack and losing its best friend, somehow manages to rewind time moments before facing demise and is able to prevent the pair from being destroyed by the explosions and noise. After they come from such a shocking event, they find themselves in the Reaper game. Now Rindo, Fred, and many others who are going to join the party/cast must use their new PSI abilities and powers to win the Reaper's game so they can return to the real world. It's a really good plot setup and a nice subversion of the typical The World Ends With You expectations. Right off the bat, we know something fishy is going on because neither Rindo or Fred die but are somehow forced to play the Reaper's game. You guys could probably easily tell that unraveling this mystery is a ton of fun to explore, on top of the numerous amount of side characters and main characters that get added into the plot line, and just figuring out how each party member interacts and works is all really great fun. But it really doesn't mean much unless we have an excellent presentation backing everything up, which, as you can clearly tell, Neo The World Ends With You handles in strides. It's like I never left. Look at how busted Shibuya is, and is that a smooth 60 FPS with some drop-dead gorgeous cell shading? Really standout stuff. We gotta talk about that camera work, obviously. It really grabs your eye as you move throughout locations. I love the homage to early Resident Evil style camera work, which, to be fair, The World Ends With You definitely did themselves during the DS game, but it's just nice to see it replicated in 3D. Those top-down and constantly switching scenes like a film, depending on what area you're in, yeah, that's really great stuff. It's even got some really cool perspective shots, like the world unfolding before our party's eyes as they run towards the 104 building. I mean, that's really sick. They did an excellent job translating the DS exploration feel into the console space, and nothing was really lost in quality during the transition from 2D into 3D. As a matter of fact, honestly, I think the 3D look really benefits Neo's art style. Shibuya feels a lot more lively because of it, and cars and people move through the city streets, all passing through you like you don't exist in, well, classic The World Ends With You fashion. We also get to see a lot more of Shibuya, so that's always a plus in my book. Oh, speaking of which, shops are back in full force. Of course, we have the series staple fashion branded stores. I mean, these are the places where they sell gear for clothing and stuff like that, duh. But also lucrative pins that are going to be used in combat. Each storekeeper has their own little personality and voice lines for when you purchase things, and with the more you shop, the more levels you can get and the more gear you can unlock. So it kind of pays off to dedicate yourself to a brand and, well, shop till you drop, if you will. The World Ends With You also has tons of culture put into it. Because Shibuya is one big city, we also have the addition of restaurants. Now, these aren't just your typical ramen and street stands, nah. They've got all sorts of food items, ranging from cafes, Indian curry, good old American fashion burgers, and dessert-themed parlors. The variety each clothing brand and restaurant offers is staggering, and it's really fun to explore Shibuya, stumble across new food and clothing joints, and find which pieces that works for your party and which one they don't necessarily like. Oh, and later in the game, you eventually unlock a location where you can buy the in-game music and play it whenever you like throughout the overworld, truly letting me feel like I'm Rindo running around the city with my playlist going. Oh, and as for the soundtrack, I mean, come on. It's impeccable work. Even more genre blending than the first game. Now we got more electronic, rap, hip-hop, early 2000s J-rock, screamo, and yes, classic tracks from the first game, and so much more. It is truly top tier stuff. The level of customization the player has in-game is also very much welcome. Heck, even these vocal tracks have both Japanese and English dubs by the artist that you can choose from in-game freely, or they'll be randomly shuffled in a playlist depending on what version you want to listen to. But talking about the OST can only go so far. Let me just bump y'all some of my faves.
Righteous honor!
As you could hear, the music really stands out as one of the many focal points of the game's presentation. The battle themes hit, the overworld music is truly something special, and not only that, eventually later in the game you unlock the ability to remix tracks on the fly, giving every sound a little bit of a personal touch. When it comes to presentation, Neo The World Ends With You knocks it out of the park. The OST is on point, the visuals are outstanding, the models are expressive, and yes, even the cutscenes have a ton of effort put into them. Each character has a multitude of expressive full-body sprite changes, and the text boxes and the way the text works in the 2D spaces very dynamic, as the characters are often seen switching spaces, changing positions, and getting full-screen reveals, etc, etc. The way that they make the act of reading text something as stylish as it is something I just gotta give kudos towards. It also helps me from ever getting bored with the dialogue sections of the game. As for the UI in general, it's pretty good. Minimal and never really in the way, with simple objective markers and menus to navigate. If anything, I wouldn't mind a menu that's a bit more stylized, like giving it the look of a phone or something, since Rindo uses his phone like all the time. Minor nitpicks aside, the menus are great at showing exactly what needs to be seen at a first glance, giving more layered information if the player seeks it out. Omega bonus points towards showing off how each pin works and what you can expect the pins to do before equipping them in combat. I always love when games do that and show a little video on the side, and low-key this should be a standard for any character action style combat system. And yeah, this is clearly just a segue so I can discuss the Neo The World Ends With You's gameplay is quite the special beast compared to, say, an action RPG like Kingdom Hearts or the Tales of franchise. If anything, it's very close to that feel of the DS original title. So how does the sequel translate such an admittedly weird system over to a 3D console platform space? And in my opinion, quite well. Pins are now tied to multiple characters in your party, since you'll always run a minimum of 3 at least. Pins, instead of being swipes, taps, and pulls, are now relegated to button commands that you can set. For example, triangle pins are used for melee, square pins are used for projectiles, and bumpers like L1 and R1 are used for charge moves, things of that nature. Each pin has a set amount of uses per combo, so try not to go too hand mashing those buttons around, because if you're not paying attention, they'll go right on the charging block mid-fight. This makes every fight you get into extremely tactical. You really gotta observe the battlefield and make sure you fight noise accordingly, and make sure you don't just rush in there and blow away all your pins, as they're gonna be left charging, and you'll be left rolling around with one of the worst dodge mechanics I've ever used in a JRPG, although we can assume it was designed like that on purpose. So now that we know how Neo's combat works and what not to do in it, let's look into why it feels so good. A battle goes pretty much as follows. You lock onto an enemy, hit them with either your melee or ranged attacks, and once you do enough damage, you'll send them into a stun, which you can drop the beat on them. Hit an enemy again in the blue or orange range to build your groove meter. The groove meter, once at 100% capacity, will spark a huge damaging move. These could be electric cages that lock down enemies, it could be a giant meteor summon. There's tons of different combinations depending on what elemental pins you're using during that beat drop. There's also a ton more attack options like the one I just mentioned, dragging cars into homies, placing bombs, and even a built-in parry pin. Tons of cool combinations that make every fight feel unique. Another thing that I loved about it was how it never really feels like the pins are unbalanced. Every pin has its place, which I appreciate a ton, and they lead themselves into very unique combo opportunities, and it opens the door for rush down and offensive fights or really defensive projectile / party heal plays. It's honestly one of my favorite Square Enix combat systems, very reminiscent of, say, a weird PS2 game I'd stumble across in the bargain bin that's got hidden gem written all over it. My personal favorite set of attacks, love a combination of melee and projectiles, usually projectiles with an ice combo so I can freeze enemies in place, and a charge move like a shotgun blast or a rapid fire laser that sets up for a ton of lockdown combos with free shots, then hitting them with a groove meter and a melee combo, launching them into the sky, and building groove until I'm ready to unleash it and wipe enemies out in one fell swoop. Combat just does a really good job of expressing player freedom, and the game goes even further with that, as seen with the customization options on display. It offers a ton of upgrades that let you rock multiple pins at once, uber pins which are super powerful, and with the game's story, you gain more pin actions you can use in a fight through the addition of party members and other special abilities you can unlock by completing the social network. Oh, and if that's not enough for you, you can even evolve pins that you're using frequently to make them even better than they were previously. Combat is just ultra satisfying to play throughout the entire game. Combos are punchy, the sound effects and battle callouts sound great, and even though the voices may stumble over each other from time to time, it never gets annoying or grades on my nerves. As for fighting enemies in game, I mean, they're all really fun times too. The squishy enemies like your birds, frogs, and jellyfish are just DPS checks in all honesty. They are easy to take on, it's just showing off how crazy powerful you've gotten over the course of the game. However, when we get to those threats, the bears, sharks, elephants, scorpions, and a ton of other secret ones that pop up deep into the game, these guys all have similar issues when it comes to tackling them. They hit like a truck, they can tank hits and avoid getting beat dropped due to that super armor, and lastly, they got those huge old health bars that you gotta deplete. It's really fun changing up your strategy and looking through the Noisepedia to see what pins you have to bring into a fight to exploit a bigger guy's weakness. This brings me to the last point of the gameplay, which is, as you know with any JRPG, the dreaded grind. It's completely optional in true The World Ends With You fashion. The only way to initiate fights to grind are through opening up the thoughts menu, seeking out noise and battling them to level up your pins or evolve them into more powerful attacks, or if you want to for upgrade reasons, you could just leave them as B. Now, it's all standard grindy JRPG stuff, just wrapped up in a really fun combat system and again, completely optional. Now, yes, you still will have to do some things according to story or plot reasons, but if that's not your thing and say you don't like fighting a lot in JRPGs, you're just there for the plot, there is a difficulty slider that goes a long way in making the game a lot more easy and accessible for players of that nature. You can put it on easy, but the only penalty you'll encounter is a lower drop rate, which if you're playing it on an easier difficulty anyways, shouldn't be that much of a hindrance, as you should be able to get by with the pins you'll find in stores, and of course the enemies will drop them every once in a while. It's again not that big of a deal. That being said, the bulk of overworld exploration and main story progression is done through social interaction, puzzles about the Shibuya environment, and dressing up in some sick swag to progress the plot. The game and presentation work hand in hand to form a memorable experience that blends together really fun character action combat set pieces, as well as riddles and other puzzles that involve memorizing the Shibuya layout. Neo: The World Ends With You is everything I could have asked for in a JRPG, let alone in a sequel. Super compelling combat that's optional, but I find myself picking fights just to experiment new pin combinations to see what flavor of weapons fit me. I really love exploring Shibuya, and the puzzles along with the gameplay elements they give you to figure out said puzzles are what makes the world super satisfying to explore. And lastly, the characters and the writing in general is all really 10 out of 10 stuff. They truly feel like teenagers and young adults making the best of what should be an extremely depressing situation, or at least alarming, but I love how each character constantly bounces ideals off each other, and some ideals get challenged, some need to be fixed, and it's never made to belittle or make fun of characters, except for a few comedic purposes. But however, it's handled in friendly manners that just, I don't know, puts a huge old grin on my face seeing these characters interact and be wholesome with each other. My personal favorite was Fred. He stole the show for me in terms of what you would consider side characters. His personality and how he works off each character in the cast really hit different, and he's a standout funny guy who deserves the entire world. Rindo is also a superb protag, trying to do everything in his power to get his life back to normal, but also learning he's got to step up and take responsibility for things. It's a really fun arc to explore. The whole cast is something truly special to me, and the plot in the center, despite being a bit of a corny ride, it just really worked out for me. So if you couldn't already tell, Neo: The World Ends With You is one of my all-time favorite JRPGs, definitely up there with the greats. Not only is its combat ecstatic and a ton of fun to pull off combos and strings, it's also a great storyline and, in my opinion, does a lot to surpass the original in terms of how it presents itself in presentation and things like that. Does this mean that it's better than the original or anything like that? No. They're both great in their own merits, and they both definitely deserve to be played. It's just that I really liked what they did with Neo: The World Ends With You, especially after taking such a long gap in between sequels or making content in general for the game. So yeah, it's a really standout time. I absolutely implore that you guys check out Neo: The World Ends With You if anything I talked about or shown seemed interesting. Otherwise, as for now, I couldn't show you guys too much clearly in the gameplay section as it has a ton of visual spoilers, so we are going to have to, unfortunately for the story analysis section, delve into spoiler territory. This is for my people that have either finished the game or have already watched playthroughs or whatnot or live streams, so keep that in the back of your head as we move to this next section. Timestamps are already down below and on screen in and etc. if you want to skip to the end of the video and not have to deal with that and get to the full outro. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're leaving here, I wish you all the best, and for the rest of you, let's delve straight into the meat of the video and talk about my favorite beats from the story. You could tell this game is really about loss and tragedy and overcoming that with the power of friendship. And it sounds corny, but as a mental illness thing, I think it works out quite well. Having the game be so wholesome in terms of its support group, and even characters that bicker a lot like Nagi and Fred finally get together, especially towards the middle and end of the game, to talk things out and be more up forth with each other, is why I love The World Ends With You's writing so much. These characters are definitely going through a lot of heavy themes and subjects, but they're talking it out, being very polite about things, and never getting into arguments no matter how dire the situation gets. It's truly the most wholesome thing I've seen. They don't have time to get upset with each other and argue and start bickering and fighting. Instead, they just talk things out like, yeah, honestly, teens would, and it's kind of wholesome. Like, there's still a teen vernacular and a little bit of slyness and snark to it, but you could tell they're all good friends just trying to get through the hardest of a situation, and that's what makes the overcoming loss aspect of this game so darn good, because characters are willing to sit there and listen to the struggles, sit there and talk things out, throw their own advice in there on why you should move past some of the struggles. You could tell they really went in on letting the team just be a big support system for each character, and it's never more prevalent than Fret and Nagi finally understanding where they are coming from when he really breaks down and talks about what he went through in the RG with his friend's suicide. Everyone in the game comes together to help him out, and it's also like that when Rinno talks about Moitoi or Shoka talking about her Reapers. Like, yeah, we had boss fights with these characters, but they still don't clown them and make fun of them. They still sit down and talk about it with Shoka and are like, hey, you know, what's going on? If you don't want to do this, we can take them on for you, but you could sit the fight out and stuff like that. The amount of really wholesome ways they handle these things just brings the biggest grin to my face, and that's why I love the character dynamics and interactions so much in Neo: The World Ends With You. It's about overcoming loss and overcoming the struggles of depression and things like that, but knowing you can't fight that fight alone, and if you have the opportunity or the support system to, you gotta talk with some people and get it all out your system. And that right there is some peak 10 out of 10 writing for me personally. Hopefully with everything that we discussed, you guys can really see where I'm coming from. As I say, Neo: The World Ends With You is one of my all-time favorite JRPGs, and also one of the best games I've played of 2021. If there's anything you guys liked about the game, and if you've played it, please comment down below. I'm very curious to see your guys' thoughts on the product at hand. And on top of that, if you liked the video, please make sure you hit the like button, share the video around if possible, and make sure you drop a subscription with the bell on, as it really will go a long way in helping my content get out there to everyone else. This was a huge undertaking for me, and I'm just glad that enough of you guys pulled up and watched it and hopefully enjoyed the video at hand. Thank you all so much for watching to the end. It really means a lot, and I wish you all at home a good day. Make sure you stay safe out there, stay vaxxed or whatever you gotta do, and of course, be safe. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one. Peace.